The year is 58 BCE, and the northern wind carries with it more than just the scent of pine and snow. In the provinces of Cisalpine Gaul and Illyricum, a new governor begins his tenure beneath the soft creak of leather armour and the distant murmur of alpine rivers. His name is Gaius Julius Caesar, but in this moment he is simply a man appointed by Rome, bound by senatorial decree and surrounded by legions sharpening blades not yet stained. The Rubicon still lies ahead, quiet and untouched, for now he stands at the edge of empire watching. The land to the north is Gaul, broad, wooded and restless. It is not a single nation, but a patchwork of tribes, tongues and tempers. The Aedui, the Arverni, the Sequani and dozens more, each with old grievances and newer ambitions. Their alliances shift like the Saône in spring, meandering and swelling, sometimes flowing clean, sometimes full of mud. Some tribes call themselves friends of Rome, others remember Roman promises with tight smiles and long memories, and beyond even Gaul, across the wide Rhine, dwell peoples whom the Romans call Germanic, though what precisely defines them remains uncertain, even now. Caesar arrives not with trumpets but with paperwork. His proconsular imperium is legal, his authority sweeping, and his ambitions wrapped in civility. But the legions he commands, 4 to start with more to come, speak the older language of campfires, ditch digging and marching feet. They do not speculate about politics, they sharpen stakes. Some say Caesar is here merely to maintain Roman interests. Others whisper that the Senate has granted him too much reach for too little oversight. Still others, particularly those far from Rome's marble corridors, care less for such rumours and more for the steady arrival of grain, coin and discipline. The fields are sown, and the roads, Roman-built and stubborn, reach further into the north each year. The seasons here move slowly, with winters that bite through wool and summers that hum through meadows thick with bees. In the borderlands, Gallic tribes trade amber and salt in open markets, their stalls leaning toward Rome and away from the dark pine forests. Roman merchants travel under armed escort, speaking clipped Latin to those who answer in thick accented dialects. Mutual suspicion is exchanged more often than silver. Still, for now, the frontier is calm, quiet, the kind of quiet that hums beneath a lid just beginning to rattle. The legions build camps near rivers, the Rhone, the Saône, the upper tributaries of the Rhine. Each evening watchfires glow like low stars across the hills. Tents are pitched in rows as if the land itself were an unfolded scroll. Engineers measure, survey, level. The Roman military machine unfolds not with haste, but with the patience of stonemasons and scribes. The local Gallic chieftains observe this order with a mix of awe and calculation. Some wonder aloud how Rome manages to carry so much timber so far from its forests. Others joke quietly that the Romans must be part beaver. Caesar attends councils, dispatches letters, and issues orders. He listens more than he speaks, a habit less from humility than strategy. He knows that in these early days, perception is worth more than force. He wears his armour only when needed. His cloak, deep red, is not yet dusted with the soil of the north. Still, his eyes are already measuring the roads, the terrain, the tribes. He does not yet act, not fully. But the gears of ambition are already turning. A letter arrives from Rome. It speaks of politics, accusations and rivalries, though nothing urgent enough to matter this far north. Rome is always speaking, always squabbling. Out here, among the long grasses and slow rivers, the empire feels both distant and inevitable. It is a strange paradox. The farther one moves from the capital, the more powerful Rome seems to become. In this frontier calm, Caesar learns of movement beyond the Jura mountains. A tribe, the Helvetii, are preparing to migrate westward. Their homeland, they claim, is no longer suitable. They seek better lands near the Atlantic and have asked for safe passage through Roman-allied territory. It is a polite request, written with formality, but behind it lies something else, an assertion of will, a reshaping of geography, a prelude. The Helvetii are many, perhaps 250,000 by some accounts, though later historians suspect Caesar may have inflated the number. Whether by error, boast, or intention remains unclear. What is clear is that even 100,000 travellers with carts, women and livestock are enough to trample fields, disrupt trade, and awaken sleeping hostilities. Caesar does not respond immediately. He sends scouts. He summons local tribes and asks them, ever so gently, how they feel about their neighbours wandering through their grain stores. Some nod, some frown. All agree that this is troubling, though none want to speak first. The Helvetii, for their part, begin their preparations with the quiet certainty of a people who have already burned their bridges, literally. They torch their towns to ensure no one returns. A poetic gesture, perhaps, or a practical one. Either way, it is hard not to admire the commitment. Roman officers watch from afar, unimpressed by the smouldering ruins but fascinated by the organisation. The Helvetii do not scatter. They march, organised, determined. As if they have read a Roman manual on logistics, then decided to improve upon it. In the nights before spring, rumours spread between Roman camps like the smoke from their cook fires. Some say the Helvetii are armed to the teeth. Others claim they're fleeing something darker still: famine, Germanic incursion, prophecy. One centurion, half joking, suggests the Helvetii are following a star. Another replies, without smiling, that stars can lead men to war just as easily as to gods. A Gallic trader, overheard in a wine tent, shrugs and says the Helvetii have always moved in circles, like stubborn cattle with nowhere else to go. Caesar, for his part, continues to listen. He writes his reports in careful prose, noting the distances, the numbers, the behaviour. Whether he records truth, exaggeration, or something in between is a matter for later pens. For now, he observes, and he waits. In the stillness before the campaign begins, the legions polish their helmets until they catch the first rays of northern spring. Fields bloom, paths dry, and the air begins to carry that curious scent of iron and grass, a Roman prelude, softer than trumpet, older than marble. The Alps loom behind, white and watchful. Before them stretches the world of Gaul, as yet unconquered, as yet unnamed. The Helvetii begin to move in early spring, their wagons creaking through the valleys like distant thunder with no storm in sight. From the deep interior of what is now modern Switzerland, they leave behind their fortified oppida, their stone hearths, their gods carved in soft wood. The decision is final. They burn their villages to the ground. Not a home is left standing. To march westward is to abandon not only land, but memory. 4 major tribes join in this slow exodus, with women, children, elders and oxen all caught in the dragging rhythm of migration. Caesar writes that they number over 260,000, but the truth is clouded in ash and dust. Later generations will argue that the figure is too neat, too grand, and perhaps intended for Roman ears rather than Gallic soil. Still, the caravan is vast enough to be seen from ridgelines, and slow enough to disturb every blade of grass along its path. Their route leads them toward the lands of the Sequani and Aedui, Rome's reluctant allies. Caesar, newly stationed in Transalpine Gaul, views the Helvetii's request for passage as more than a polite inquiry. It is a test, both of resolve and reach. The Rhone River offers a natural boundary. and at a narrow place called the Bridge of Geneva, Caesar makes his first quiet refusal. He orders the bridge destroyed, the access blocked. Fortifications rise on the Roman side, as if the land itself has decided it is not yet ready for the Helvetii to pass. The Helvetii, undeterred, turn eastward and begin negotiating alternate routes through tribal lands not directly under Rome's protection. The result is friction. Old tribal wounds reopen. The Aedui, long Rome's clients in name but not always in deed, send emissaries with complaints, half apologies, and pleas for intervention. They are being overrun, they say, their fields trampled, their boundaries ignored. Caesar, who has been waiting for precisely such a moment, prepares his legions with measured calm. The first engagement occurs not in open battle, but in a shadow of motion. As the Helvetii attempt to cross Roman territory by force, Caesar intercepts them at the Arar River, the modern Saône, where part of their column still struggles to ford the quiet water. He seizes the moment. The Roman legions descend not with fury, but with cold precision. 1/4 of the Helvetii army still on the eastern bank is caught alone. The result is what Caesar later calls a victory. Some modern historians call it an ambush. The river runs quiet again within hours, as if nothing had passed. The remaining Helvetii press onward, slow but undeterred. They offer no great counterattack. Instead, they retreat and reform, drawing Caesar deeper into the Gallic interior. What follows is a pursuit across hills and heat, marked not by decisive battle, but by exhaustion, negotiations and manoeuvre. At Bibracte, a fortified hill town belonging to the Aedui, the Helvetii make their final stand. The battle unfolds under an unforgiving sun, and the Roman legions arrange themselves on higher ground, a familiar tactic. The Helvetii, despite being outnumbered and ill-supplied, fight with determination drawn not from conquest, but from the desperate promise of a new home. Caesar's soldiers, better armed and disciplined, press forward in silence. Dust chokes the fields. Spears clatter like distant hail. There is no heroism here, only the slow grind of formation and fatigue. When the Helvetii finally break, it is not a rout, but a wearing down. They retreat in long lines, pursued, cut off, and cornered. Afterward, the surviving Helvetii send emissaries to Caesar, asking not for conquest nor vengeance, but for permission to return to their ancestral lands. Their migration, born of necessity, ends with resignation. Caesar agrees, perhaps calculating that a humbled Helvetii would better serve as a buffer tribe than a scattered diaspora. He provides them with grain for the journey back, though the gesture is as strategic as it is generous. Their return will prevent Germanic incursions and keep Rome's frontier more stable than stretched. The ruins they left behind now welcome them as ghosts returning to a burned theatre. Some scholars suggest that Caesar uses the Helvetii episode to demonstrate control, to reinforce his legitimacy in Gaul and Rome alike. His own commentary emphasize order and duty, omitting the messier elements. The tribal disputes he stirs, the civilian toll, the uncertainty of his motives. Others propose that Caesar's depiction of the Helvetii as a great wandering threat may be rhetorical, a crafted prelude to justify larger campaigns. Yet even the quietest skeptic cannot deny the impact. A people set fire to their past and marched west in search of a future. And Rome, ever patient, met them not with fire, but with measured resistance. Among Caesar's legions, the Helvetii campaign leaves a particular memory, not of heroism or glory, but of endless walking. Officers later remark that the march after the river battle seemed longer than any before. The Gauls, they say, have an uncanny ability to disappear into terrain, to evaporate between forest and fog. One veteran jokes that the Helvetii must have learned their tactics from the mist itself. Another, inspecting a captured Gallic shield, notes its fine carvings, and adds that if their warriors had spent more time hammering iron than etching swirls, perhaps things would have ended differently. Yet among the Gallic people watching from afar, the Nervi, the Remi, the Carnutes, a different conclusion takes root. Rome has answered a migration not with tolerance, but with steel. The empire's patience has limits, and those limits are marked with fortifications, legions, and roads that do not yield. Still, the fields bloom again in late summer, rivers slow, camps are built along the Aeduan border with tighter discipline. Horses graze, banners sag in the heat, and the sound of hammers rebuilding causeways mixes with the occasional, almost poetic snore of a soldier napping beneath a tilted shield. The Helvetii return to their land, diminished but not destroyed. Their migration becomes a cautionary tale, their wagons a symbol of ambition misplaced. Caesar pens the account with sharp clarity, offering numbers, routes, and a tidy arc. Modern historians, with furrowed brows and gentle caution, suggest that the reality was far less neat. Perhaps the Helvetii did not intend to challenge Rome. Perhaps they misjudged the weight of imperial caution. Perhaps they simply hoped that migration, like the seasons, could pass without blood. If so, they misread the empire's patience, which moves slowly, but remembers everything. No sooner does the dust of the Helvetii settle than another name begins to ripple through the campfires of Gaul, Ariovistus. A king from across the Rhine, his presence is no longer rumour but certainty, his followers no longer shadows but soldiers. He is Germanic by Roman measure, though the label conceals more than it reveals. To the Gauls, he is a foreign force of strange customs and hardened resolve. To Rome, he is a question. He has already crossed into Gaul once, at the invitation of the Sequani, who sought allies in their disputes against the Aedui. He answered with legions of his own, warriors hardened by river winters, painted with ochre, speaking in dialects that grind like stone. Now Ariovistus does not leave. He demands tribute. He occupies land. He calls himself a friend of Rome, but only in the letter of old Senate decrees, not in their spirit. Caesar, ever fond of language, notes this contradiction with the polite alarm of a man realizing that a houseguest has quietly unpacked his belongings and started building a new wing. Caesar sends envoys, and Ariovistus responds not with sword but with Latin. He claims his rights are legal, his actions defensible. The Senate had once granted him the title Friend of Rome. He wears it now like armour, though his grip on land grows firmer with each moon. Caesar invites him to parley. Ariovistus refuses. He will not cross to meet Caesar, nor allow Caesar to approach him. It is an impasse cloaked in courtesy. Caesar presses further. He notes the rising tension among Roman allies, the Aedui's concern, the swelling Germanic numbers. Rumours swirl that Ariovistus will bring over more of his people from across the Rhine. 5,000 more, then 15. The river, once thought of as a line, now begins to resemble a door. When the two finally agree to meet, it is under tightly controlled conditions on a wide Gallic plain. Each side brings cavalry for protection. They speak at a distance, flanked by men who watch not as bodyguards, but as warnings. The conversation, recorded later by Caesar in careful prose, is tense but measured. Ariovistus reminds Caesar that Gaul is not Roman by right, and that Germanic strength is not easily dismissed. Caesar reminds Ariovistus that Roman authority is neither accidental nor temporary. There is no resolution. They part with mutual understanding, which is to say, with none at all. The following days pass with a quiet urgency. Caesar's legions maneuver eastward, watching Ariovistus's forces do the same. There are no pitched battles yet, only the sound of movement, carts, hooves, orders called at dusk. The tension grows palpable. A Roman officer quips that it's like watching two cats circle a fishbone. Another observes that the Germans do not build camps the way the Romans do. They sleep in wagons, eat standing, move often, and never seem to tire. Some legionaries whisper of omens, strange birds overhead, unexplained tremors in the ground, one night when the stars refuse to align with the usual constellations. Superstition flares when uncertainty lingers. A centurion is seen burning a small wooden token behind his tent just in case. At last, the confrontation becomes inevitable. Ariovistus maneuvers to cut off Caesar's supply lines, forcing the Romans into a more precarious position. The legions, initially hesitant to face an unfamiliar enemy, regain confidence as Caesar addresses them with quiet assurance. He speaks not of glory but of necessity, a theme that always settles well among men trained to march more than to question. He reminds them, gently, that Roman arms have never been shamed by foreign blades. The legions, heartened or at least mollified, prepare for what lies ahead. The battle unfolds near the town of Vesontio, where Caesar seizes the high ground first. Ariovistus, operating in looser formations, attempts to draw the Romans into flatter terrain. His cavalry are formidable, his infantry tall and tireless. Yet Roman discipline proves its worth. Formations hold, pylons fly in practiced arcs. The Germans, fierce in the charge, are less coordinated in retreat. They falter, they break. Ariovistus himself escapes across the Rhine, wounded in pride if not in body. His army scatters into the forests, leaving the fields heavy with silence and scavenging crows. Caesar does not pursue across the river. He has proven his point. The Rhine remains for now the edge of empire. The Germanic threat is not erased, merely postponed. Some historians later suggest that Ariovistus was never a true threat to begin with, that Caesar's portrayal of him as a looming danger served more to justify intervention than to reflect reality. Others argue that Caesar's swift action prevented a far more difficult war. The truth, as ever, lies somewhere in the footnotes. What is certain is that the name Ariovistus vanishes from the Roman record after this campaign, like breath on cold metal. In the aftermath, the legions rebuild their camps, this time with deeper ditches and wider palisades. The soldiers, having faced an enemy without temples or treaties, begin to understand that Gaul is not the edge of the world, but the threshold to something older and wilder still. They carve new roads through uncertain territory, anchoring each milestone with a quiet sense of ownership. Gallic tribes who once watched with wary eyes now offer tribute, alliance, or at least silence. Rome's footprint in Gaul deepens, not in blood but in infrastructure. Grain flows, coins exchange hands, forts rise. Amid the logistics and reports, a subtle irony takes root. Ariovistus had once been Rome's ally, his crossing into Gaul encouraged by Roman policy in prior years. His presence became inconvenient only once Caesar needed a reason to intervene. In this way, the borderlines of empire shift not only with armies, but with memory. What was once permissible becomes suddenly intolerable, depending on the needs of the season. The weather cools again, the rivers slow. The Rhine remains where it has always been, wide, grey, unmoved, but now marked in the Roman mind as both limit and legend. The legions camp near the banks, their fires glowing faintly against the current. In the evenings, soldiers stare across the water, imagining what lies beyond. Some claim they can hear distant drums. Others scoff and say it's just the river talking to itself. Either way, no one crosses, not yet. As the river mists fade and the legions adjust to the rhythm of spring, a new pulse stirs in the north. The Belgae, a broad confederation of tribes pressed between forest, river and the cold breath of the sea, begin to gather. Caesar calls them the bravest of the Gauls, though whether out of admiration or political flattery remains an open question. What is clear is their unease. They have watched the Helvetii fall, seen Ariovistus vanish across the Rhine, and now observe the slow Roman spread with quiet dismay. The roads lengthen, the camps multiply. Rome is no longer a guest in Gaul, but a resident laying stone foundations and naming landmarks in Latin. For the Belgae, who have little taste for diplomacy and even less for distant laws, this is not expansion, it is encroachment. The Belgae are not a single people, but a loose tapestry of clans and rival leaders, the Nervi, the Atrebates, the Viromandui, and others whose names sound like stones dropped into deep water. Bound less by trust than by shared fear, they agree to unite. Their plan is simple and perhaps naive. Strike before Rome is ready. Caesar learns of the gathering not through scouts, but through whispers. A letter from the Remi, a tribe of the northeast, arrives in hurried script. The Belgae are mobilizing, they say. They have made oaths by fire and sword. They intend to destroy Rome's foothold in Gaul before it hardens into permanence. Caesar acts with his usual mixture of caution and momentum. He marches north with haste, drawing supplies from allied towns and dragging his logistics behind him like a snail dragging a fortress. The roads are damp, the weather changeable. He notes that the northern forests differ from those of central Gaul, darker, thicker, more reluctant to part for civilization. When he arrives near the Ain River, the Belgae are already in motion. The Nervi, most hostile of the coalition, have taken a defensive position. Their warriors do not shout or sing. They move without fanfare, dressed plainly, their beards long, their shields narrow. Caesar remarks not without respect that they prohibit the import of wine, fearing its softness. Whether this is true or a Roman projection of virtue onto their enemies is unclear, but it makes for a sober image. Initial skirmishes test both sides. The Belgae attack a Roman ally, the Remi town of Bibrax, in a furious but disorganized assault. Caesar responds by strengthening his position, constructing a fortified camp near the Ain, and preparing for a major engagement. The Belgae, unable to dislodge the Romans or maintain unity among their tribes, begin to splinter. Some turn homeward to defend their own territories, others retreat into the marshes. Caesar follows cautiously, not rushing into the bogs and brambles where Roman discipline becomes tangled in unfamiliar terrain. The decisive moment comes near the river Sabes, or so Caesar calls it. The exact location remains debated, its modern equivalent uncertain. Some say it was the Selle, others the Sambre. The ground is thick with ambiguity, and even now archaeologists disagree on where the battle took place. What is certain is that the Roman legions, advancing through dense woodland, nearly walk into an ambush. The Nervi, concealed in the brush, launch a sudden and ferocious attack. For a moment, the Roman line buckles. Caesar later describes the fight as among the most intense of the war. Legions are caught before they can form ranks. Supplies fall into disorder. Centurions rally their men with quiet urgency, not heroics. The battle becomes a blur of mud, breath, and shield edge. But the Roman training holds. Discipline, that old Roman virtue, reasserts itself. Formations reform, gaps are closed, and the Nervi charge again, only to find spears instead of panic. Slowly the tide turns. When the battle ends, the Nervi are broken, their leaders fallen, their numbers decimated. Of 60,000 warriors, Caesar claims only a few hundred survive. The figure strains credulity. even by ancient standards. Later historians raise eyebrows. Perhaps the number was exaggerated, perhaps the Nervi were never that numerous to begin with. Or perhaps Caesar, pen in hand, felt the pull of a good ending. Still, no one denies the cost. The Roman legions suffer as well. The dead are buried quickly, their names inscribed later with abbreviated honorifics and quiet regret. In the aftermath, the surviving Nervi surrender not with ceremony, but with silence. Caesar orders their protection, a gesture that reads both as mercy and as a warning. Other Belgae tribes, seeing the Nervi fall, abandon the coalition. Some seek terms, some vanish into the woods. The uprising dissolves not in flames, but in fatigue. Caesar, ever the observer, notes that among the Belgae, even defeat is carried with stiff dignity. The Roman camps near the battlefield remain sombre for days. Armour is mended, wounded tended, and the engineers begin to measure new roads. The frontier, once fluid, now bends more firmly toward Rome. Among the legionaries, stories from the battle at the Sabes begin to circulate, of a standard-bearer who stood unmoving as arrows fell like rain, of a cook who picked up a sword and held a flank, of a Nervian warrior who refused to fall until both his arms were broken. Whether these tales are truth or tribute no one knows, and no one asks too closely. One soldier remarks, over salted barley and diluted wine, that the Gauls may be fierce warriors, but they do have the unfortunate habit of standing in front of Roman javelins. Another, with less levity, mutters that at least the Germans wore brighter colours. It was easier to see them coming. In Rome, news of the campaign reaches the capital with timing that is, as always, impeccable. Caesar's reports describe the valour of the legions, the tenacity of the enemy, and the strategic necessity of further consolidation. The Senate reads, nods, and applauds. Grain prices remain stable. Statues are proposed. No one asks too many questions about the roads being built across territories still technically sovereign. After all, they are only roads, and who can object to roads? In Gaul, the Belgae fall back into quieter patterns. Their confederation shattered, their warriors buried, they return to tilling fields and watching the horizon. The Roman legions remain, stationed not as visitors but as residents, their camps surrounded by ditches, watchtowers, and the low rustle of Latin among pine needles. The land does not resist, not now, but it does not forget. The rivers continue to run northward, patient and unchanged, carrying with them the soft echoes of commands shouted in a foreign tongue. The western wind carries salt and dampness, curling around Roman banners like a whisper from another world. Beyond the valleys and central forests of Gaul lies Armorica, the wind-scoured peninsula, where the land narrows into sea, and the sea speaks louder than the trees. Here the tribes are different. The Veneti, Assismi, Curasolitae, Redones and others, maritime people whose loyalties are braided into the tides. Their power does not rest on horses or infantry, but on ships with high curved prows and sails of thick leather. They trade with Britain, with islands across the Channel, and with each other in a code of oaths and hostages. Their ports are their strongholds. Their speech is less familiar, their politics more opaque. When Caesar turns west, he does not enter a land of warriors so much as one of navigators and wind-watchers, a place where iron is less important than rope, and alliances drift with the weather. It begins, as it often does, with hostages. The Veneti detain Roman envoys sent to negotiate grain and winter arrangements. To Caesar, this is more than insolence. It is a breach of diplomatic ritual, the fabric that holds even the loosest alliances together. He responds not with another embassy, but with preparation. Yet this campaign presents a problem the Roman legions are not used to facing. The Veneti do not wait in open fields. They do not entrench on hills or stake their hopes on shield walls. They retreat to their fortified harbours, surrounded by water and accessible only by tide. Their ships, built to withstand the Atlantic's harsh moods, are heavier than Roman vessels, with reinforced hulls and deep keels. They ride the waves like carved oak whales. Roman ships designed for the calm Mediterranean flounder in comparison. The legions are strong on land, but in Armorica, land itself is part-time. Caesar orders a fleet constructed, drawing timber from Gallic forests and sailors from Roman allies along the coast. He stations troops inland to prevent rebellion from spreading, and sends engineers to observe the Veneti harbours. The Veneti, meanwhile, gather their allies and wait for favourable tides. They are confident, perhaps overly so, in the protection the sea affords. They assume that Roman rigidity will fail to adapt to maritime war. In this they are only partly mistaken. The Roman navy, once assembled, is not superior, but it is resourceful. The key innovation comes not from shipwrights, but from soldiers. Hooks mounted on long poles designed to catch and sever the halyards that hold Veneti sails. Once a ship's rigging is cut, it becomes helpless, spinning or drifting like a leaf. The battle, when it comes, is strange and silent compared to the usual thunder of cavalry or cries of infantry. Ships move slowly across the tide, manoeuvring with the deliberation of chess pieces. There is no shock and clash, only the groan of wood, the snap of rope, the dull thud of boarding. The Veneti fight bravely, but without sails their mobility is lost. Caesar later writes that their resistance was admirable, but their defeat inevitable. Some historians have questioned this certainty. Others note the heavy-handed Roman response, the execution of Veneti leaders and the enslavement of their population, a punishment intended, perhaps, as a message to the rest of Armorica. Or perhaps it was simply convenience, cloaked in precedent. Whatever the reason, the Veneti vanish from the historical stage as suddenly as they entered it, like a tide that recedes without fanfare. Among the legionaries, Armorica is remembered not as a place of battle, but of discomfort. The climate is wet and fickle. The food is strange, more fish than grain, more salt than bread. The wind never seems to stop. One soldier writes home that even the trees lean sideways from fatigue. Another jokes that the Veneti's greatest weapon was their weather. And yet, in time, Rome begins to adapt. Roads are laid across the wet interior. Watchposts appear on high ridges. Local traders, cautious but curious, begin to test Latin phrases at market stalls. The Atlantic still crashes on the rocks, but now it echoes against Roman stone. Caesar's writings on the Armorican campaign are less triumphant than elsewhere, perhaps because there is less to dramatize. The battles are smaller, the victories quieter, yet the implications are significant. A maritime people, once defiant, are now folded into Rome's framework. The coast becomes less a boundary and more a dock. Britain, once a distant silhouette across the channel, now appears tantalizingly close. Caesar begins to ask questions about that island, its trade, its tribes, its usefulness. Armorica, in a way, becomes a stepping stone rather than a destination. There is a curious footnote in some later manuscripts about the Armorican campaign. A Roman officer who, having fallen ill during the fleet construction, became fascinated with the tides. He spent days charting the moon, asking local fishermen about currents, and eventually attempted to create a rudimentary tide calendar. His efforts were laughed at by fellow officers, but one centurion admitted, after a particularly soaked march, that the man might be onto something. The officer died of fever before he could finish his work. His name is not recorded, but some fragments of his notations survive in a later commentary on Caesar's campaigns, a reminder that even amid conquest, there are those who listen more closely to the sea than to orders. After Armorica, Caesar consolidates his gains. Winter approaches. Garrisons are established. Grain is collected. The coastal tribes, subdued but not broken, offer tribute with cautious faces. The legions prepare for rest, though rest in Gaul is never complete. The sea breathes on, undisturbed by treaties. The channels remain cold and grey, and the wind continues to whisper in foreign syllables. In Rome, the news arrives with little celebration. The Senate has moved on to other matters: debt, elections, scandal. The Western campaign is noted but not examined. Roads in distant provinces rarely stir applause. Yet Caesar, ever attentive, understands the long game. The conquest of Gaul is not measured in trophies, but in lines drawn on maps, in the number of days it takes to send a letter from Lyon to the Channel. In Armorica, those lines are now dry enough to walk on, if only just. Some say that Armorica remains Rome's most reluctant holding, too windy to tame, too stubborn to fully absorb. Others argue that its very remoteness makes it useful, a corner of Gaul that keeps the rest from unravelling. Either way, the campaign ends without a decisive finale. The ships are hauled onto the shore and left to decay. The rain returns. The tribes, watched and wary, return to fishing, to carving, to singing songs that rise above the waves like birds refusing to be catalogued. The legions march east again toward firmer ground and thicker history. Behind them, the Atlantic rolls on, unimpressed. After the ships of Armorica rot in quiet rows and the last of the coastal winds are replaced by inland silence, Caesar turns back toward the heartland of Gaul. The interior, stitched together by shallow rivers and gently rising forests, seems at first glance pacified. Roads extend. Markets reopen. Allied tribes resume their small rivalries beneath the wide umbrella of Roman protection. Yet beneath this temporary calm, in hollows and hill forts, something older stirs. The Eburones, a tribe without cities, without pretensions, scattered between the Meuse and the Ardennes, begin to gather. Their chieftains are named Ambiorix and Cativolcus, and though little is said of them at first, their knowledge of Roman habits is deep, their memory of conquest fresh. They watch and they wait. Caesar, preparing for winter, disperses his legions across the region. Camps are built near grain supplies, each manned by a cohort or two. Among them is the camp of Sabinus and Cotta, two Roman commanders stationed among the Eburones. The decision, like many made in cold months, is based on logistics. There is food nearby, the terrain seems manageable, and the alliance, formal but frail, holds. Ambiorix visits the Roman camp under the flag of courtesy, bringing grain, pleasantries and warnings. He tells the Romans that Germanic tribes are crossing the Rhine again. He urges them to evacuate before it is too late. It is a clever lie, or perhaps half-truth. Sabinus, uncertain, decides to retreat to the nearest legion. Cotta hesitates, but the march is agreed upon. They leave the camp with their men in tight columns, their armour muffled with cloth against the cold. The ambush comes in the woods. Eburonus warriors descend from the trees with spears and quiet fury. The Roman column buckles. Sabinus attempts to negotiate mid-battle, stepping forward under a sign of truce. He is cut down. Cotta fights to the end. The entire legion is destroyed. 6,000 men vanish in a single morning mist. News travels slowly in winter, but this does not stop its weight. Across the region, Gallic eyes widen. A Roman legion has been annihilated. It is not simply a defeat, it is a reminder. The empire is not invulnerable. Caesar receives the news with grim resolve. He consolidates his remaining forces, recalls troops from other outposts, and prepares for retribution. The Eburones, aware of what is coming, do not wait behind walls. They vanish into their forests. Unlike the Belgae or the Veneti, they do not offer open battle. They scatter. They hide their food. They harass supply lines. They appear, strike, disappear again. It is not a war of conquest, but of subtraction. Every patrol must account for the woods. Every cookfire must be extinguished by dusk. Caesar responds with scorched earth. He marches through the Eburones' territory, destroying stored grain, torching villages, poisoning wells. It is less a campaign than a purge. Yet the land absorbs the violence with disturbing ease. There is always another valley, another clearing, another shadow. Caesar invites nearby tribes to plunder the Eburones, hoping to flush them out through hunger and rivalry. Some accept the invitation, eager for Roman favour or spoils. But the Eburones know their terrain too well. The forest is their last defence, and it does not betray them. The Roman legions, trained for fields and cities, find themselves slogging through unfamiliar paths, ambushed by silence. One soldier reportedly mutters that even the birds here are in on the conspiracy. Another notes that it's hard to conquer a people who refuse to be found. In a quiet moment, Caesar visits the ruins of the Roman camp once held by Sabinus and Cotta. There are no survivors. The earth has begun to reclaim the site. Tent stakes have rotted. Wild dogs sniff the ashes. A single Roman shield lies half buried in mud, its metal rim dented, its emblem faded. Caesar does not linger. The message is already understood. Even among allies, the borders of trust are thin. Some historians have debated whether Caesar underestimated the Eburones or simply misjudged the season. Others suggest that he overreacted, that the brutality of his response sowed more resentment than deterrence. Still others point out that winter in any century is a poor time to expect order. The Eburones are never fully subdued. Their name fades from the records, not because they are defeated in battle, but because they disperse beyond recognition. Their villages are erased, their identity fragmented. In a sense, they win by ceasing to be visible. Modern archaeologists struggle to locate their settlements. Their language, customs, and even burial practices are lost. What remains is their absence, a silence that speaks through the caution of later campaigns. Among the Roman legions, the Eburones episode becomes a cautionary tale told around watchfires. One centurion jokes that the Eburones are like bad weather. You can't predict them, and you can't fight fog with a sword. Another, more serious, keeps a carved bone charm from the Ardennes as a reminder that even the smallest tribe can leave the deepest wound. The engineers, ever practical, begin building more secure winter camps with deeper trenches and thicker walls. The quartermasters double-check their grain records. Even the cooks carry knives now. Elsewhere in Gaul, the Eburones' rebellion inspires admiration more than emulation. Other tribes take note, but few attempt the same path. Caesar's response, while severe, is effective. Rebellion, they understand, is a fire that must be fed constantly, or it burns only its own kind. Still, in songs and stories, Ambiorix survives. His name becomes a whisper of resistance, a symbol that even the empire has shadows it cannot banish. When spring returns, it does so cautiously. The rivers run thinner. The frost lifts slowly. Caesar reviews his campaign logs and notes that the Eburones have ceased to exist as a coherent force. Their disappearance is recorded as victory, but the forest remains, silent, indifferent, and untamed. The legions move on. The roads stretch further. Rome, ever forward, continues its long exhale across Gaul. The river runs wide and slow, a grey mirror to the sky. The Rhine is not just a geographical boundary, but a psychological one. a ribbon of water separating the Roman order from the world beyond, where tribes speak in harsher tongues, follow unknown gods, and move through forests deeper than maps. To the Romans, the Germanic side is a land of giants and ghosts, of warriors who worship no temple and submit to no census. Yet they do not stay beyond its banks. From time to time they cross, to trade, to raid, to answer calls from Gallic allies, or to seek land for their growing numbers. Each crossing, no matter how small, is a crack in the illusion that the empire ends neatly at the water's edge. In the summer following the Eburones' disappearance into the woods, Caesar faces just such a crack. Germanic tribes have crossed into Gaul again, responding to tribal appeals or perhaps testing the looseness of Roman attention. They are led this time by the Usipetes and the Tencteri, names unfamiliar to Roman ears, though their presence quickly becomes impossible to ignore. Their warriors are skilled horsemen, their weapons crude but effective, their approach more migratory than military. They claim they are fleeing oppression from stronger tribes east of the Rhine. They seek settlement, not conquest, or so they say. Caesar listens, as always, but his mind calculates the implications. He knows the weight of precedent. If one group is allowed to settle, others will follow. The line of the Rhine will blur, and Rome does not thrive in blurred lines. Caesar first offers words, then warnings. He meets with envoys from the Germanic side, speaks in formal terms, insists on retreat. The Germans offer vague replies and delay tactics. Meanwhile, their cavalry begin to probe Roman foraging parties, sometimes attacking them. The boundary between negotiation and deception vanishes like morning mist. Caesar responds with force, a rapid attack launched during a moment of supposed parley. The Germanic leaders, caught off guard, are either killed or scattered. The Roman legions fall upon the unsuspecting encampment with relentless order. It is a rout. Men, women, children. The entire migrating population is driven back toward the river. Many attempt to flee across it. Few succeed. The river, indifferent as always, carries bodies downstream, silent as ever. This moment, controversial even in its own time, has long puzzled historians. Caesar frames it as necessary, a preemptive strike to preserve Roman order and prevent deception. Critics, ancient and modern, have questioned whether the Germans posed an immediate threat or whether Caesar sought a spectacle, a message carved in water. Some point out that the attack occurred during negotiations. Others argue that in frontier politics, negotiation and war often wear the same cloak. What is certain is the result: a crossing, a battle, a massacre, and then a decision. Caesar orders a bridge. Not a pontoon crossing or ferry system, but a full timbered bridge spanning the Rhine itself. The order is as bold as it is absurd. The Rhine is broad and deep with a swift current. To cross it with an army is one thing. To build over it, that is something else entirely. But Caesar's engineers, trained as much in geometry as warfare, set to work. Trees are felled. Piles are driven into the riverbed using heavy rams. Crossbeams are lashed in place. It takes 10 days. The result is not just a bridge, but a statement. Rome does not wait for permission. Caesar marches his legions across the new span and into Germanic territory. He does not go far. He does not need to. His goal is not territorial acquisition, but demonstration. He wants the tribes across the Rhine to know that the river is no longer a wall. It can be crossed, measured, traversed. His march is methodical and brief. Villages are passed. Scouts are sent out. No major engagements occur. After 18 days, he returns across the bridge and orders it dismantled. The message is clear. The Rhine is not inviolable. The border is whatever Rome decides it will be. To the soldiers, the bridge becomes legend. Some claim it hummed at night, the water pushing against its post like a living thing. Others joke that the engineers built it just to prove they could, like a child stacking stones higher each day. A centurion remarks, between bites of barley bread, that they built a bridge faster than most Gauls build fences. It becomes one of those strange stories soldiers tell for years, part triumph, part folly, entirely Roman. Among the tribes east of the Rhine, reactions are mixed. Some retreat deeper into the forests. Others send envoys of peace, laden with apologies and tribute. Most, wisely, do not test the bridge a second time. The psychological shift is complete. Rome's power is no longer defined by roads and walls, but by reach. The Rhine, like the Rubicon will later be, has been crossed, not in defiance, but in demonstration. A line redrawn with planks and discipline. In the long quiet afterward, Caesar returns to administrative matters. Tribes are reorganized, alliances reaffirmed, grain supplies recalculated. The legions move back into their usual winter quarters, but something has changed. The legions have walked into a land they were never meant to enter, and returned without loss. The feat becomes part of Caesar's growing legend, not just as a general, but as an architect of Roman momentum. In Rome, the Senate reads of the crossing with mixed feelings. Some praise the audacity, others frown at the political implications. The more cautious minds in the Republic sense the undercurrent, that Caesar's legions are becoming as mobile as thought, as unrestrained as ambition. Yet for now the Rhine remains quiet. Its surface reflects only sky, not intent. The bridge is gone, dismantled plank by plank, its ghosts left behind in the water. Spring passes into summer again. The forests recover. The paths through Gaul thicken with use. Yet among the people, Gallic, Roman and otherwise, the story of the bridge lingers, a structure built not to last, only to speak, a crossing made not to hold land but to hold memory, and beneath it all the river flows on, unchanged, unreadable, indifferent as ever. Even the most seasoned soldiers in Caesar's legions find something unsettling about the sea. It is not just the motion, the slow, lurching rhythms that throw off a marcher's stomach, but the endlessness of it, the absence of borders. For men trained to measure their world in paces, milestones and walls, the open channel between Gaul and Britain is a space without geometry. Yet by 55 BCE, Caesar turns his gaze across it, not for conquest, at least not yet, but for reconnaissance, for theatre, for reach. Britain has long whispered in Roman minds as a place of mystery, an island of tin and fog, trade and tribes, rituals and reeds. The Gauls speak of it with both familiarity and myth, claiming ancient ties and wary respect. Caesar, with his growing taste for the symbolic, prepares to make the crossing. He gathers intelligence first, questioning Gallic merchants who trade along the coast. They offer half-answers, names of tribes, vague distances, stories about chariots and kings. Some are eager to please, others evasive. Few have actually seen the island's interior. The channel itself, narrow on the map but unpredictable in current and weather, offers its own set of complications. Caesar orders ships constructed, adapted versions of those used against the Veneti, flat-bottomed, sturdy, wide enough for horses. He assembles 2 legions, not for conquest, he insists, but for demonstration. Letters sent back to Rome carry careful phrasing. This is not an invasion. It is an exploration, a show of Rome's curiosity and capability. The crossing begins in late summer, when the winds are steady and the tide favourable. Yet even then nature intervenes. The ships depart at night, hugging the coast until they reach the narrowest part of the strait. As dawn breaks, Britain emerges from the mist, not with grandeur, but with indifference. Low cliffs, wet sand, and a thin line of waiting figures, warriors with painted faces and upright spears. The Britons, alerted by Gallic messengers, or perhaps the rhythm of Roman activity, are ready. They stand above the shore, not numerous, but visible. The Roman fleet designed for rivers and ports finds no harbour. The water is too shallow to sail in, too deep to wade comfortably. The legionaries hesitate. The centurions call for order, trumpets sound, muted by wind. What follows is more spectacle than battle. The Romans disembark awkwardly, struggling through the surf, shields raised above the waves, weapons made heavier by salt. The Britons throw javelins from the shore, move quickly, retreat faster. The Roman cavalry cannot follow, their horses still on ships, their footing unreliable. For a time it seems that the expedition will collapse not through violence, but through embarrassment. Then, slowly, the tide of professionalism rises. Roman formations take shape even in waist-deep water. Standards are planted in the shallows, arrows are loosed. The Britons withdraw inland. The landing is secured. But victory, if the word applies, is muted. The Romans cannot pursue. The train is foreign, the supply lines long and fragile. The legions camp near the coast, waiting for supplies that are slow to arrive. A storm scatters the fleet. Many ships are damaged. The anchoring Roman narrative begins to fray. Envoys from local British tribes arrive, offering hostages and promises, gestures of peace or delay, or both. Caesar receives them with formal civility. He cannot afford a prolonged engagement. Already the signs of autumn are in the wind. He takes the hostages, sends messages of success, and prepares to leave. The return to Gaul is hasty, under the cover of a fragile truce. Caesar does not linger. He leaves before the weather changes further, before the island reveals its full complexity. Back in Gaul, the legions regroup, the ships are repaired, and the hostages disappear into the logistics of empire. Reports are sent to Rome describing the journey as a victory. The first Roman crossing of the Channel, the first treaties signed with the tribes of Britain. Technically true, politically useful. Yet those who march through the surf remember a different story, of confusion, of wind, of unfamiliar shores. Among the soldiers, Britain becomes a subject of wry humour. They call it the land where horses drown and fires don't start. One centurion jokes that even the fog there looks suspicious. Another claims the fish are shaped like senators, slippery and always turning. Yet beneath the humour is a shared unease. Britain is not like Gaul. It resists familiarity. It does not fold into Roman rhythm. It drifts, like its own continent. Caesar, ever observant, files the experience under preparation. He has not conquered Britain, but he has stepped onto its shore. He has shown that the sea is not a barrier, only a delay. The next time, he notes to himself, the ships will be more numerous, the supplies better arranged, the cavalry ready. The island cannot be held yet, but it can be reached. And in the arithmetic of empire, reach often precedes grasp. Some modern historians see the first British expedition as a performance, designed less for military gain and more for political optics. Rome, restless and competitive, rewards ambition made visible. Crossing to Britain, even briefly, even inconclusively, places Caesar ahead of his rivals in terms of daring. Others argue that Caesar truly sought information, to map the edge of the known world, to judge whether conquest would be profitable or poetic. Still others suggest that the expedition was a test of tides, of enemy tactics, of his own men. Whatever the motive, the result is a footprint in the sand, later erased by tide but never forgotten. Caesar's commentaries describe the British as fierce and numerous, their warriors adept with chariots, their alliances unstable. He names tribes and chiefs, though some of these names appear nowhere else. It is unclear whether he translates them imperfectly, invents them for narrative clarity, or receives them from Gaulish informants who simply guess. There are no maps, only conjecture. Britain remains a shadow drawn with broad strokes. As the legions return to their winter quarters in Gaul, the talk of Britain fades, replaced by local concerns, grain shortages, minor revolts, restless allies. But the channel now feels narrower. The edge of the world has shifted, and across that water, unseen and distant, the island waits. Not conquered, not defeated, not yet fully known, just there. The following year brings new intentions and more preparation. The channel, once crossed with curiosity, now beckons with resolve. Caesar returns to Britain in 54 BCE, not as a visitor, but as an invader, bearing 5 legions, 2,000 cavalry, and a fleet far larger than before. The lessons of the first expedition are folded into the architecture of the second. Better ships, reinforced rigging, more navigators, more grain, fewer assumptions. The sea, still restless, offers less resistance this time. The fleet assembles at Portus Itius, sails on the turn of the tide and lands without resistance. The Britons, perhaps recalling the pain of previous contacts, do not contest the beaches. They wait inland, regrouping in the hollows and forests where their chariots can spin freely, and Roman formations struggle to follow. Caesar advances carefully. The weather holds, supply lines are steadier. Hostages from previous arrangements are nowhere to be found, a minor insult that carries large consequences. Among the British tribes, resistance is coordinated by Cassivellaunus, a leader from the north who unites various factions more out of necessity than unity. He does not meet the Romans in pitched battle. Instead, he relies on movement, ambushes, hit-and-run raids. His chariots strike from the tree lines, scatter before counterattack, then vanish like flocks into the mist. Caesar's legions, trained for predictable terrain, adapt slowly. Their shields clatter louder in the woods. The order of Rome meets the improvisation of Britain, and neither is comfortable. The Roman advance pushes toward the Thames, where Cassivellaunus is said to hold territory. The river is crossed under resistance, the current biting against armour, and the banks uncertain. Caesar notes the use of sharpened stakes hidden beneath the waterline, a defence both clever and cruel, invisible until too late. Still, the legions push forward. Skirmishes flare and die. A few towns are captured, their walls little more than earthen embankments, their defenders slipping away into the green beyond. Cassivellaunus, finding the ground increasingly uncertain, sends messengers to allied tribes to attack the Roman naval camp. It is a coordinated plan, but the assault fails. The ships hold, the guards remain alert, and the British are driven back. Eventually, with allies withdrawing and Caesar's pressure mounting, Cassivellaunus seeks terms. Envoys are sent. Hostages are exchanged. This time in earnest. Tribute is promised, and the northern coalition begins to fray. Caesar, mindful of winter and the limits of supply, accepts the gesture. He does not overreach. He orders no garrisons, leaves no legions behind. The conquest is symbolic, a show of strength, not of permanence. The legions return to the coast, load the ships, and recross the channel, arriving back in Gaul with the scent of moss and wood smoke still clinging to their cloaks. The second British expedition is larger, longer, and more logistically sound than the first, but still it ends not with conquest, but with departure. Caesar's commentaries portray it as a clear success, submission gained, tribute promised, alliances formed. But beneath the polished prose, modern scholars detect ambiguity. Britain is not pacified, its tribes remain largely autonomous. The Roman grip, if it ever closes, does so decades later, under emperors with different ambitions and more permanent maps. Still, for Caesar, the campaign serves its purpose. He has crossed the sea twice, fought in an unfamiliar land, and returned with trophies and tales. In Rome, where reputation is currency, that is more than enough. Among the soldiers, Britain becomes a story told in exaggerated tones, the land of damp fires, blue-painted warriors, and chariots that hum like bees. They remember the endless woods, the cold rain that finds its way under every cloak, the odd silence that hangs between skirmishes. One centurion recalls an ambush in which the Britons sang before attacking, a low chant like wind through reeds. Another claims that British wolves howl differently, though no one can explain how. In Gaul, the news of the British expedition spreads unevenly. Some tribes see it as proof of Roman reach, others as a distraction. A few emboldened leaders begin to plot. If Rome can be drawn across the sea for an island it cannot hold, perhaps its hold here is not as firm as it appears. But for now the legions remain in place, their discipline unbroken. Garrisons are reinforced, roads extended, supplies tallied. Caesar divides his legions among several camps, a logistical strategy that keeps grain close and restlessness far. The autumn passes with uneasy quiet. No major uprisings stir, but neither does full peace return. The tribes are watching, not in fear, but in calculation. Some continue to send hostages and tribute, gestures offered with solemn expression and tight smiles. Others delay, test, probe. The line between submission and defiance becomes thinner than parchment. Caesar notes these shifts but does not react. He is preparing. The next campaign, he knows, will not be against foreign islands or unknown shores. It will come from within, the embers of revolt smouldering beneath the quiet surface of Gaul itself. As winter approaches, the channel closes again, blanketed by storms and heavy clouds. Britain fades once more into silhouette. Caesar does not speak of returning a third time. He has drawn his line, made his gesture. The purpose of the invasions, as whatever it truly was, has been served. The sea is no longer unfamiliar, the island no longer mythical, yet it remains just out of reach, as much an idea as a place. Some modern readers of Caesar's text question whether he ever intended to conquer Britain at all. Perhaps he meant only to intimidate, to extend Rome's psychological frontier. Perhaps he sought distraction, a campaign to fill his scrolls and outshine rivals. Or perhaps he believed that the mere act of stepping onto the island would shift its fate forever. In any case, the footprint has been made, however faint, and footprints, even when washed away by rain, are remembered by the path that led to them. The legions settle in again, their campfires glowing against the darkening sky. Armour is hung to dry, maps are rolled and stored. The sound of waves fades into memory, replaced once more by the rustle of leaves and the soft rhythm of marching boots on Gallic soil. Winter arrives not with snow but with silence, a dense, expectant hush that settles over the Gallic countryside like a veil. Fields lie bare, the last grains threshed and stored. Roman camps spaced across the territory in what Caesar believes is a practical distribution of resources and oversight, begin their long hibernation. Each camp is its own island of discipline, surrounded by a sea of alliances that grow brittle in the cold. Fires are lit early, roads turn to mud, Tribes that once nodded at Rome's presence now closed their gates with quieter hands. The legions scattered among the Carnutes, the Eburones' former territory, and the edges of the Treveri settle into routines. Drills are shortened, supplies are tallied, letters are sent back to the south with dreams of spring. Caesar himself departs for Cisalpine Gaul as expected. The business of governing cannot wait, and his presence in the province is required, or at least customary. The legions remain in place, insulated by fortifications and faith in Roman order. But the order is thinner than it seems. Among the Gallic tribes, resentment does not melt away with diplomacy. It only hardens in the cold. The burden of tribute weighs heavier in winter. The memory of slaughter, the Veneti, the Belgae, the silent disappearance of the Eburones, lingers like smoke that refuses to clear. Ambiorix's rebellion is not forgotten. The destruction of a Roman legion had echoed far and deep, even if its aftermath was buried in scorched fields and silence. Now, with Caesar absent, with the legion split, the idea returns. Rebellion not as fury, but as patience. The Carnutes strike first. In the town of Cenabum, Roman merchants are slaughtered, their goods looted, their alliances severed with sudden finality. The act is swift and calculated. It is not a mob, but a message. The fire that consumes their quarters is less important than the signal it sends. News travels faster than winter roads should allow. Across Gaul, tribal leaders gather in darkened halls, their oaths whispered rather than spoken aloud. The seeds of a larger revolt begin to germinate in the cold. At first, the Roman garrisons hold. Their walls are sturdy, their discipline intact. But unrest flickers around them like wind licking a torch. Messages are intercepted. Supply lines are cut. Small ambushes begin to test the edges of the empire's reach. It is not yet open war. It is probing, the soft knuckle tapping before the door is broken. In some places, Roman officers dismiss these signs as local discontent. In others, veterans remember the Eburones and keep their spears near their beds. Caesar, alerted by courier, returns with haste. The route from Italy to Gaul is long, but the urgency is real. He finds the situation already shifting beneath him. More tribes are joining the undercurrent. The Treveri, restless for years, begin moving warriors toward the borders. The Senones, long considered pacified, begin to delay their grain deliveries. Even the Aedui, Rome's oldest Gallic allies, hesitate. It is not betrayal yet. It is the first twitch of doubt. And doubt, once planted, grows well in winter soil. The legions are summoned and repositioned. Camps are reinforced. Bridges are checked for sabotage. Caesar moves north and west, not in conquest, but in response. His campaigns shift from expansion to containment. The rhythm of war becomes colder, quieter. Skirmishes are brief and brutal. Ambushes are foiled or suffered. The Romans march with caution, no longer assuming the ground beneath them belongs to them. Each village passed is either a haven or a trap. The legions begin to rely more heavily on local intelligence, but even this is fraying. Trust is hard to find when oaths have begun to melt. Caesar notes in his commentaries that Gaul is like a field of dry grass. One spark, and the whole of it may burn. He writes this not as poetry but as warning. The danger is no longer a single tribal chieftain. It is the slow coalescence of anger into unity. For years, Rome has fought Gaul as fragments, Helvetii here, Belgae there, coastal tribes one year, forest tribes the next. But now there is motion towards something larger, not yet a nation, but a direction. It whispers in every camp and between every tree. The legions, despite the hardship, remain effective. Fortifications are maintained, scouting intensified, and supplies protected. Some camps endure minor sieges, but none fall. A Roman cohort stationed near the Nervi lands reports a night of torchlit chanting in the woods. Not an attack, just presence. A performance. One soldier remarks that it's worse than battle. At least in battle, someone decides when it ends. In Rome, the unrest in Gaul is heard more faintly. The reports are read in marble halls with polite concern. Senators argue over Caesar's ambition, not his strategy. Some believe he provokes resistance simply to justify staying. Others warn that Gaul, if left unfinished, will never be stable. The political winds remain fickle, but for now Caesar holds his command. He writes of the uprising as tests, as reminders of Rome's necessary vigilance. Yet his tone begins to shift. The pride remains, but the confidence grows more guarded. Among the Gallic leaders, the figure of Vercingetorix begins to rise. Not yet prominent, not yet named by Caesar's quill, but present in whispers. A chieftain of the Arverni, young but formidable, he begins to speak of unity. Not peace with Rome, not individual glory, but of something shared, of a Gaul that does not bow. His name, for now, is spoken quietly, but it travels. The winter passes with more tension than snow. Roads are mud, the rivers swollen. Yet in this wet quiet, rebellion does not sleep. It waits. The legions continue their patrols. Armour is cleaned nightly, blades kept sharp. Scouts are sent farther than before. Caesar meets with his officers in hushed tones, their fingers tracing the map like physicians examining a wound. The land has not changed, but its meaning has. By the end of winter the storm has not yet broken, but its pressure is felt in every corner of Gaul. The rebellion, still uncoordinated, has begun to breathe as one. The Roman camps remain, lonely islands of discipline in a sea that no longer lies still. And in the forests, beneath the wet branches and misted hills, the war ahead begins to gather itself. The spring of 53 BCE arrives not with birdsong or bloom, but with the crunch of boots on frozen ground, and the uneasy rustle of banners in wind. The air is clear but tense, as if Gaul itself is holding its breath. Though winter has receded, its shadow lingers, stretched across the minds of commanders and chieftains alike. Caesar, now fully returned from the south, moves quickly to reassert control over the lands he once believed pacified. He knows that trust, once frayed, cannot simply be stitched back with promises. Action is required, and it begins in the northeast, with Ambiorix, the elusive architect of Rome's most humiliating loss in Gaul. Though the Eberons as a tribal entity have all but vanished, scattered and burned by Roman reprisal, Ambiorix remains uncaptured, his image growing larger with each failed pursuit. He's not seen often, but his influence is felt, in sabotaged grain carts, in vanished messengers, in the silence of allied villages that suddenly have nothing to say. He becomes less a man than a pattern. Caesar, unwilling to leave this thorn untouched, launches a series of operations into the region once again. These are not grand campaigns, but careful incisions designed to slice away any remnant of Eberonian resistance. The legions march through thick woodland and shallow ravines, burning what is found, leaving nothing behind. They are not here to conquer, only to erase. But Ambiorix, as always, is ahead of them. He does not offer battle. He does not linger in any village long enough to be betrayed. He has become a rumour carried on the wind, a whisper among cattle herders, a name etched faintly on an abandoned doorframe. Roman scouts find tracks that lead to nowhere. Traps are laid and found empty. Whole valleys are combed without result. Caesar begins to suspect that Ambiorix is being protected not just by loyalty, but by fear, or perhaps by something older, a sense among the Gauls that he has become a part of the land, an ungoverned presence. The Romans press further. Forests are razed, caches of grain destroyed, riversides searched, and hilltop forts reduced to ash. Caesar offers rewards for information, but few come forward. Those who do are vague or contradictory. One Gallic informant claims Ambiorix has crossed the Rhine. Another insists he is hidden in the marshlands near the Meuse. Neither is verified. The campaign becomes a slow grind, and Caesar's frustration seeps into his prose. He does not call it a war, but it consumes months, resources, and morale. Elsewhere in Gaul, the effect of this prolonged hunt is felt deeply. Tribes that once flirted with the idea of rebellion now pause. The message is clear. Rome may be slow, but it does not forget. The punishment is not just swift, it is patient. One Aeduan chieftain, watching a column of Roman soldiers pass his village for the third time that season, remarks privately that Rome is like a wheel. It turns slowly but crushes whatever lies beneath. Still, not all are deterred. In the north, the Menapii offer Ambiorix sanctuary, or at least fail to hinder him. Their marshes provide cover. Their loyalty remains uncertain. Caesar responds with force, sending troops to harass their lands, seize livestock, and remind them of their obligations. Among the soldiers, Ambiorix becomes a sort of ironic legend. They refer to him with a mixture of respect and exasperation. "He walks on wind," says one legionary. "He sleeps in fog," says another. A joke circulates that if Ambiorix were Roman, he'd be promoted just to stop embarrassing the officers. His reputation grows with each failed capture. Some veterans begin to suspect he is dead, and that the resistance moves only in his name. Others believe he is watching from the trees, always just beyond the last torch. The truth is never confirmed. He vanishes again. Caesar eventually calls a halt. The campaign has exhausted its value. No cities have been taken because there are none left to take. No battles won because none were offered. Ambiorix has not been defeated, but his absence has been weaponized. The land he once ruled is empty, its people scattered or enslaved. The message is sent, even if the man is not. Caesar turns his attention to the wider stage. Yet even as the legions shift focus, the consequences of Ambiorix's continued evasion linger. The notion that a single chieftain, without fortress, army, or senate, can wound Rome and walk away begins to unsettle the edges of empire. It invites imitation. It whispers of frailty. In response, Caesar accelerates his consolidation efforts across Gaul. New treaties are written, older ones reaffirmed. Garrison forces are reinforced. New roads are surveyed to better link the provinces. The infrastructure of Roman permanence grows denser, like ivy creeping across old stone. One Roman officer, writing in his personal journal, observes that Gaul no longer feels like a war. It feels like weather. Constant, shifting, wearing you down rather than knocking you over. Another, more cynical, notes that the best way to conquer a people is to convince them that resistance is too exhausting to maintain. In Rome, the reports from Caesar continued to describe the situation as stable, the territories as loyal. He includes the hunt for Ambiorix only in passing, phrased as a mopping-up operation, a final pursuit of a fugitive more symbolic than strategic. Historians later struggle with this portion of the Gallic War. The lack of definitive encounters, the absence of victories measured in cities or casualties, makes it harder to pin down. Some argue that Caesar inflated Ambiorix's importance to justify the effort spent chasing him. Others suggest he minimized it to preserve the illusion of control. Still others point to the subtle success of the campaign. No new major revolts that year, no alliances coalescing into rebellion. Ambiorix may not have been caught, but perhaps his isolation is victory enough. The season ends without ceremony. The legions return to their fortified camps. Their boots, once caked with river mud, now rest beside campfires. The air carries the first hints of another winter. The woods grow quiet again, though every rustle still draws an eye. Ambiorix, wherever he is, remains untaken. His rebellion, though crushed in body, lingers in spirit, a reminder that even Rome, with all its roads and walls, cannot always find the man it seeks. But it can change the map around him, and sometimes that is enough. As the year folds into its latter half and the leaves begin to curl along Gallic tree lines, Caesar no longer walks the terrain as a governor of a province, but as the executor of a punishment. The time for offers has passed, and diplomacy, always more pretext than peace, is set aside. After years of marching, fighting, and writing, Caesar's patience has worn to the bone. Gaul, in his eyes, has tested the limits of Roman tolerance, and his next movements reflect not caution, but message. There will be no ambiguity. The tribes that have resisted, delayed, or merely hesitated will now feel the full, deliberate weight of imperial retribution. What begins as a series of punitive actions expands into something wider, a scorched earth strategy, designed to break the will of not only the rebellious but the hesitant. The campaign moves swiftly. The Menarpi, whose marshy lands once offered refuge to Ambiorix, and whose allegiance has always been vague, are the first to feel the edge of retribution. Caesar sends legions deep into the thickets of their lowlands. The Menarpi offer no grand defence. They withdraw, dissolve into the wetlands. But their homes do not vanish with them. Villages are burned, livestock seized or slaughtered, grain stocks destroyed. The Menarpi return to find not defeat but deprivation. This is the new rhythm of Rome, not conquest by battle but by absence. A tribe that cannot eat cannot rebel. A field that is salted cannot yield warriors next year. From the west, Caesar pushes north and east, targeting the remaining splinters of resistance. He moves with fewer speeches, fewer declarations. What was once framed as a civilizing mission is now sharpened into a cleansing one. Roman foragers do not ask permission. Scouts burn as they map. Engineers repair roads behind columns of soldiers that leave only ash. No battle is recorded as decisive, and yet the legions do not stop moving. Entire regions, once teeming with Gallic names and minor kings, fall into quiet. Not submission, something more enduring, disruption. The Treveri, still discontent and ambitious, are drawn into open confrontation. They had watched the prior year's instability with interest, testing Rome's attention with cautious overtures toward rebellion. Now, with Caesar's attention fixed and fury sharpened, they are reminded of their place. The revolt is put down not in one stroke, but through the steady application of presence. Roman camps rise near their borders, roads cut through their forests, and nearby tribes are bribed or threatened into isolation. With no allies and no momentum, the Treveri yield. Their leaders are detained, their cavalry is disbanded. The punishment is subtle, no massacre, no spectacle, just a slow removal of options. In the midst of these operations, Caesar finds moments to reflect, though always in action. He writes of these campaigns in terms of necessity and deterrence, not vengeance. But his prose becomes leaner, colder. There is less of the theatrical flourish that once coloured the earlier commentaries. The Gauls, he seems to say, had their chance. The war is no longer about misunderstanding or alliance. It is about ending the capacity to resist altogether. The term pacification begins to appear more frequently. though its application feels increasingly like an epitaph. Among the Roman legions, the work becomes mechanical. Camps are erected with familiar precision, trenches dug, palisades raised, rations measured. Soldiers no longer expect pitched battles. They expect long marches, cold mornings, and the acrid smell of burning that clings to everything. Armour, tents, even bread. One legionary writes on a wax tablet that Gaul tastes like smoke and iron. Another remarks that they haven't fought a proper enemy in weeks, only shadows and ruins. The commanders rarely speak of glory anymore. Instead, they speak of completion, as if they are builders finishing a wall, brick by brick, farm by farm. Gallic survivors, those who do not flee or resist, begin to adapt. In some villages, children learn the Latin words for grain and surrender, before they learn the Gallic ones for sky and wind. Tribute is offered not in fear, but in habit. Local chiefs, once proud and autonomous, now greet Roman officers with studied neutrality. Their voices carry neither hope nor hatred, only calculation. A chieftain from the Bellovaci offers his son as a hostage without being asked. When questioned why, he replies that at least in Rome, the boy might eat through the winter. Still, the land resists in its own quiet way. Rains flood temporary roads. Livestock die suddenly. Couriers go missing. A Roman detachment disappears in the Ardennes. Never found, never avenged. Some soldiers mutter that the ghosts of the Eberons still walk there, leading men off the path into woods that close behind them. Officers dismiss such talk, but fewer patrols are sent at dusk. In a small valley near the Samba, a Roman engineer overseeing the repair of a bridge finds an old Gallic token wedged between two stones. A carved boar, worn by water, smooth to the touch. He keeps it in his satchel without telling anyone. He does not believe in omens, but he also does not leave it behind. Later that night, a storm collapses the nearly completed bridge. The token, if it survives, is never seen again. In Rome, these campaigns are described as methodical, necessary. The Senate reads Caesar's reports with nods and minor applause. The threats are said to be diminishing. The territories are stabilizing. The words do their work. Caesar is granted further powers, and the treasury opens more funds for supply lines and winter bonuses. Few senators ask what remains in Gaul for Caesar to conquer. Fewer still ask what remains of the people he has already subdued. By the time the season ends, Gaul is quieter than it has been in years. Not peaceful, merely emptied of resistance. Rebellious chieftains are exiled or executed, their names replaced in Roman records by numbers and notes. Fields lie fallow where they once fed war. Forests grow denser around abandoned settlements. The map, once covered in tribal names and uncertain boundaries, is now increasingly Roman, cleaner, straighter, more legible. The legions settle again into winter quarters, their armour polished, their routines restored. Fires are lit against the early frost, and watch rotations are assigned without urgency. But beneath the frost something stirs. Not rebellion yet, but memory. And in the south, in the lands of the Arverni, a young chieftain begins to speak in circles of elders. Not of vengeance, but of unity. His name is Vercingetorix, and though Caesar does not yet write of him, the next chapter already waits in his silence. In the cold lands of the Arverni, where the rivers cut deep through forested hills, and the wind whistles down narrow passes with the voice of old gods, the first embers of true resistance begin to catch. It does not begin with battle or proclamation, but with quiet meetings in shadowed halls, in groves too sacred to forget. The name spoken there is not Caesar's. It is Vercingetorix, a chieftain's son, recently returned, young by some measures, Yet already wrapped in the bearing of command, he listens before he speaks. He waits before he moves, and when he moves, it is with clarity. He does not offer empty oaths or seek alliances of convenience. He speaks of unity, of Gaul not as a patchwork of tribes, but as a single land, one that has bent too long beneath foreign measure. He does not call for war first, he calls for understanding. And then, once the heads have nodded, and the fire in their eyes has warmed, he speaks of revolt. The timing is delicate. Caesar, as winter deepens in 52 BCE, is once again in the south, attending to matters of administration, justice, and preparation. The legions are scattered in winter quarters, as they have been each year. The Gallic territories, though fractured and weary, remain watchful. But something has shifted. The punitive campaigns, the scorched fields, the vanished villages, they have not broken Gaul. They have awakened it. The fear is still present, but so is resolve, and Vercingetorix carries both with him like matched blades. His first action is not symbolic. It is strategic. He rallies the Arverni and moves to seize control of the broader territory. Some of his kin resist, preferring accommodation to rebellion. He casts them out. He raises levies, gathers cavalry, recalls old tribal pacts. When he turns to neighbouring tribes, he does so not with pleas but with proof. The Carnutes, who had already tasted revolt in the fires of Cenabum, answer swiftly. Other tribes follow, Bituriges, Lemovices, Caduci, Seniones. Names that once spoke only of location now begin to echo with cause. The idea of Gaul, long used by Rome as a general term, begins to take on meaning among its own people. Vercingetorix avoids the errors of past rebellions. He does not seek to meet the Romans in open field, not at first. Instead, he adopts the strategies Rome itself had used to dominate the land. He targets supply lines, burns storehouses, destroys roads. He forbids cooperation with Roman merchants and punishes traitors with swiftness that Caesar himself might admire. His goal is not to defeat the legions outright, but to exhaust them, to starve them, to force them to chase shadows across a land they no longer understand. When Caesar learns of the uprising, his reaction is measured. He moves quickly, yes, but without panic. He knows how to put down rebellions. He has done it for years. He gathers his forces with practiced urgency, sending messengers to recall scattered cohorts, ordering bridges reinforced and roads cleared. But something in this campaign feels different. The coordination is tighter, the resistance broader. The very routes he once used to advance are now hostile. Fires burn where granaries once stood. Villages once friendly now bar their gates or vanish into the woods before the legions arrive. Cenabum falls first. The town, already steeped in the memory of the merchant massacre, becomes the opening strike in the new war. The Carnutes sack it, killing the Roman settlers and torching the warehouses. Caesar responds immediately. He marches his nearest legions with forced speed, reaches the town in days, and makes an example. The city is stormed, its defenders slaughtered, and the remaining structures burned to the ground. But the message, Caesar soon realizes, does not land as it once did. Rather than deter further rebellion, it accelerates it. The fall of Cenabum becomes a signal, not a warning. Vercingetorix, far from shaken, uses the event to galvanize more tribes. His forces grow, not just in number, but in confidence. His cavalry, drawn from tribes across central Gaul, becomes a mobile spear point, striking at Roman supply columns and disappearing before counterattack. He avoids major towns when needed and defends them when tactically sound. At Gergovia, the hill fort of his homeland, he prepares one of his strongest positions. Caesar, determined to strike at the heart of the rebellion, marches south. The siege of Gergovia is a rare moment of Roman frustration. The town is perched high, its natural defences formidable, its defenders prepared. Caesar attempts a combination of direct assault and deception, using feints and night movements to unsettle the defenders. But the terrain favours Vercingetorix, and the local population supports him with unflinching loyalty. A miscommunication among Roman cohorts leads to a failed assault on the walls. Casualties mount, morale dips. The legions retreat in good order, but not without loss. It is one of the few clear defeats Caesar suffers in Gaul, and he records it carefully, attributing the outcome not to Vercingetorix's strength, but to the difficulties of the ground and the failings of certain units. Still, the loss does not end the campaign. Caesar adjusts his strategy, focusing on separating the Gallic tribes rather than confronting them en masse. He splits his forces, marches in unexpected directions, and regains control of several key territories. Vercingetorix, in turn, responds with a strategy of containment. He destroys food supplies in Roman paths, knowing that hunger is more persuasive than sword. The land itself becomes a weapon. Fields are burned ahead of the Romans. Wells are poisoned. Forts are abandoned after being stripped of everything useful. Among the legions, the campaign becomes a test not only of discipline, but of endurance. They march for days without regular resupply, survive on half rations, construct fortified camps with urgency. The cold returns early that year. One soldier writes that Gaul seems to breathe differently now, more deeply, more darkly, as if preparing for something final. The name Vercingetorix is no longer laughed off around fires. It is spoken with the same grim respect once reserved for Ariovistus or Ambiorix, but with a new weight. This one has not yet lost. In Rome, the reports stir both interest and unease. The rebellion is larger than expected. Caesar requests reinforcements and receives them. His supporters praise his resilience. His enemies begin to speculate about overreach. But Caesar presses on, knowing that this is not just another campaign. This is the test of everything built so far. The road from the Rubicon begins here, though no one knows it yet, and Vercingetorix, far from finished, prepares his next stand, atop a hill called Alesia. The hill of Alesia rises like an old knuckle from the landscape, steep, encircled by rivers, protected by ridges and natural barriers that seem to lean inward like the ribs of a great animal curled to protect its heart. Here, Vercingetorix makes his stand. After months of retreating, manoeuvring and wearing down Roman supplies with scorched fields and vanishing roads, he chooses Alesia not as a final gesture of desperation, but as a calculated risk. The oppidum at the summit is well fortified, stocked with provisions, and surrounded by open slopes difficult for siege equipment. It is, by Gallic standards, nearly impregnable. Inside its walls are tens of thousands of warriors, civilians, horses, carts, and the tension of a people on the edge of both defeat and defiance. Vercingetorix knows Caesar will come. He is counting on it. Caesar, as expected, arrives. He sees the challenge clearly, not only the defences but the symbolic gravity. This is not just a siege, it is a reckoning. If Alesia holds, the rebellion may spread again like wildfire through dry grass. If it falls, Gaul may fall with it. He does not hesitate. The legions are ordered to encircle the hilltop stronghold. Work begins at once. Ditches are dug, ramparts raised, palisades sharpened and stacked. Engineers calculate angles and distances. Earth is moved as if the land itself is being rewritten. A circumvallation is constructed, a continuous line of fortifications around the hill, nearly 11 Roman miles long. But Caesar knows the Gallic alliance is not confined within the walls. Relief forces will come. So a second line is built, this one facing outward, stretching 14 miles around his rear, a contravallation to protect against an enemy he cannot yet see. The result is a ring within a ring, a vast machine of timber, earth, and Roman patience, pressing slowly against time. Inside Alesia, Vercingetorix watches the work unfold. His cavalry makes one final attempt to break through before the circle closes. They slip past the Roman line in the night, scattering to find reinforcements from the tribes that still waver between loyalty and delay. Word is sent to every ally. The relief force must come quickly. Meanwhile, within the walls the waiting begins. Supplies are counted, rations are cut. The warriors remain confident at first. They sing, they plan, they cheer from the battlements. But days stretch into weeks. The ring tightens. Hunger begins to gnaw at the corners of defiance. Outside the walls, Caesar's men endure a different trial. The legions work in shifts, building towers, digging traps, maintaining watch. Ditches filled with sharpened stakes and concealed pits are layered beyond the ramparts. The outer defences are a forest of engineered danger. Yet even with all preparations, there is a sense of breath held too long. They know the relief force will come, they just don't know when. It arrives suddenly, as autumn begins to roll across the land in golden decay. Estimates of its size vary. Caesar claims it numbers 240,000, a figure modern scholars suspect is inflated. But the army is large, unified, and motivated. It gathers on the plains beyond the Roman line, and with it comes pressure, not only in numbers but in time. Caesar now stands between two enemies, the besieged within and the rescuers without. What follows is not a single battle but a grinding crescendo. The Gallic relief army tests the Roman defences with wave after wave of attacks. Skirmishes flare along the outer line, probing for weakness. Vercingetorix coordinates strikes from inside, launching sorties that hammer the inner ramparts. The Romans hold, but only barely. Arrows arc through the dusk like falling stars. Signals flash from hilltops. Drums sound from both directions. Sleep becomes a luxury. The legions shift from building to fighting, from defence to survival. At one point, a breach nearly forms on the western sector, where a Gallic force pushes through a weakened gate. Caesar himself arrives at the scene, directing reserves, rallying men, standing at the edge of the chaos with his red cloak visible to all, not as vanity, but as anchor. And then it turns. After days of attrition, the Gallic relief army, unable to penetrate the defences, begins to falter. Their assaults grow less coordinated, their supply lines overstretched. Inside Alesia, food has run out. Horses are slaughtered. Civilians beg to be released, but the Romans deny passage. Some are sent out by Vercingetorix, hoping to reduce the burden. They wander between the walls, neither side accepting them. They die in the open, in silence, between the two worlds. The siege continues, and then it breaks. The relief army withdraws, slowly, then in fragments. Vercingetorix, watching from the walls, understands. There will be no rescue. The silence after their retreat is louder than any trumpet. The decision comes quickly. On the next morning he rides out alone, dressed in full armour, his horse steady beneath him. He does not bring a sword, only his dignity. At the Roman camp he dismounts, removes his armour, and kneels. According to tradition, he says nothing. He offers himself for the mercy of the victor. Caesar accepts the surrender, but the mercy is thin. Vercingetorix is taken prisoner, destined to spend years in a Roman cell before his final display in Caesar's triumph and quiet execution thereafter. The rest of the defenders are disarmed, catalogued and sorted. Some are sold, some spared, some lost to history. The siege of Alesia marks the end not just of a campaign, but of Gallic resistance as a unified force. There will be skirmishes still, pockets of unrest, scattered rebellions, but the dream of a single Gallic uprising, of tribes standing together beneath one name, ends here. Not in fire, but in encirclement. Caesar writes of Alesia as his finest moment, a display not of violence but of control. The fortifications, the double walls, the measured deployment of force, it is Rome at its most deliberate. Among the legions, the siege becomes legend. Veterans speak of the ring, the trenches, the endless nights when the air hummed with war on both sides. They remember the civilians left between the lines, the silence after the final trumpet, the look on Vercingetorix's face. Some call him the bravest man they ever fought. One centurion, long after the campaign, describes him not as a barbarian, but as a mirror, someone who made the legions see their own resolve reflected back at them, only in different language. As winter begins again, Caesar writes his reports and prepares for the political consequences of his success. The conquest of Gaul, begun years earlier as a duty and opportunity, now nears its close. The provinces are reorganized. The map shifts again, but across the hills of Alesia, the wind still moves through the grass, past shallow graves and broken stones. The ring has been removed, but the memory of it endures, drawn not in ink but in the long shadow of silence. With the fall of Alesia, the momentum that once carried the Gallic resistance begins to wither beneath the slow, deliberate tread of Roman order. The tribes that once rose in song and alliance now move more cautiously, speaking in subdued tones, negotiating not rebellion but survival. Vercingetorix, their great hope, is gone, not slain in glory but bound and led away in chains. His figure no longer rallies warriors but disappears into the long corridors of Roman captivity, leaving behind only stories told in huts and ashes. The Gallic world does not collapse, but it bends, quietly and completely, until it begins to resemble Rome more than itself. Caesar spends the following months tightening the web. The provinces are reorganized, boundaries redrawn, alliances reshaped. Tribes once autonomous are now administrative units, their leaders granted titles in exchange for obedience. Forts are constructed with greater permanence, stone replacing timber, gates replacing ditches. Roman merchants follow in the legion's footsteps, bringing amphorae and scales, linen and coin. Latin begins to echo in markets where once only Gaulish was heard. The change is not immediate, nor is it absolute, but it begins, and it does not stop. Yet even in this moment of triumph, flickers of unrest remain. The Bellovaci resist. The Bituriges stir. Small factions take to the forests, not in hope of victory, but out of habit, or pride, or the simple refusal to bend completely. Caesar responds swiftly to each ripple. He moves his legions like calligraphy across the map, crisp, elegant, practiced. Skirmishes are crushed, settlements fortified. The legions are tired but steady. After years of war, they no longer question purpose. They know only direction. One final coalition rises in 51 BCE, led by the stubborn Bellovaci in the north. It is smaller than previous efforts, more desperate than coordinated. Still, it draws attention. Caesar dispatches his legate Trebonius to contain it, then arrives himself to oversee the campaign. The resistance is fierce in places, ambushes in thickets, sudden cavalry raids, coordinated defences among fields and rivers. But the Romans adapt as they always do. They build camps. They isolate threats. They do not rush. Slowly, inevitably, the fire burns out. By early 50 BCE, Caesar declares the war over. The province of Gallia Comata, long-haired Gaul, is brought fully into the Roman sphere. Cisalpine and Transalpine Gaul are already settled. What remains of tribal independence is absorbed into bureaucracy. The census begins. Taxes are collected. Roman judges travel roads newly paved. Their scrolls bundle beneath woolen cloaks. Grain moves southward toward the Italian heartland. Soldiers, at last, begin to receive news of retirement and land grants. Some stay, some settle. Others return to Rome, carrying with them memories of forests, mist, and names that will vanish within a generation. Caesar, meanwhile, turns his attention southward. The Senate watches. His enemies in Rome, long wary of his growing fame, now grow alarmed. The legions are loyal, not to the Republic, but to the man who led them across rivers, through famine around burning villages, into and out of sieges that should have broken them. The soldiers write his name in their letters. They chant it in camp. They wait for his command. Yet for now Gaul rests, not in peace perhaps, but in quiet. The great campaigns are over. The names that once crowded Caesar's dispatches, Helvetii, Nervi, Venetae, Eberhuns, Arverni, now fade into administration. Some tribes retain ceremonial positions, others vanish into footnotes. A few remain only in Caesar's writing, inflated or minimized as needed, depending on their role in the narrative. Even the rivers, the Sabes, the Era, the Loire, are no longer obstacles. They are waypoints. The geography of resistance becomes the logistics of empire. Among the Gauls, memory changes form. Elders speak of the old days before the legions came, when decisions were made beneath sacred trees, when war was a matter of clan and oath. Children now learn Latin prayers alongside Gallic charms. Roads cut through fields once sacred. Temples are built beside ruins. Coins bear foreign faces. Some adapt, some remember. Others forget by choice. In Caesar's final report to Rome, Commentari de Bello Gallico, he casts the conquest as both necessity and achievement, a defence of Roman interests, a correction of foreign instability. He writes in clear, formal prose, offering just enough detail to dazzle, just enough omission to preserve his myth. Historians will argue for centuries about the truth of these words, whether they reflect events faithfully or frame them to serve a purpose. But for the moment, they are accepted, and once accepted, they become reality. The legions, now seasoned and heavy with experience, are gradually withdrawn. A few remain behind to manage garrisons and oversee infrastructure. Roads are widened, new settlements are planned. Veterans are granted farms on land once contested by sword. In these outposts, Roman life begins to take root, not by proclamation, but by routine. Markets open, forums are laid. The empire grows not through war alone, but through the slow repetition of structure. Yet even now the hills remain. The forests still stand in places too remote for surveyors. The sea still breathes against Armorica's cliffs. The voices of the old gods are quieter, but they are not entirely gone. Sometimes in the fields beyond the new towns, a traveller hears a song in a language they cannot name, spoken in rhythm with the wind. And sometimes, in Roman camps, veterans dream of Vercingetorix, not in fear, but with the unsettled memory of having met something they did not fully conquer. The Gallic Wars, as Caesar called them, span 8 years. They began with migration and ended with absorption. They saw tribes rise and vanish, saw the invention of enemies and the shaping of empire. They reshaped a region, elevated a man, and redrew the lines of Rome's imagination. But to those who lived through them, Gallic or Roman, they were not history. They were hunger, fire, snow and command. They were tired feet, uncertain orders, and banners that flapped above unfamiliar hills. Now, at their end, the land is quiet, the camps are still, and somewhere just south of the new frontier a general considers his next step. The Rubicon waits, but that too is another border. The fires burn lower now, the camps are quiet. The long arc of conquest has settled into stillness, and the legions, once restless on the march, stand at ease. Gaul, once a mosaic of fierce defiance and fleeting alliances, rests beneath a softer, unfamiliar sky. The banners no longer flap in urgency but in rhythm with the wind. Roads stretch into dusk, tracing paths where once there were only forests and rumour. Stone replaces wood, Latin replaces echo, silence replaces revolt. The rivers flow as they always have, unconcerned. The Saône, the Rhône, the Seine, each moving gently through land that remembers what the empire forgets. The forests regrow where fields once burned. The voices of chieftains fade beneath the rustle of trees. Somewhere in the deep interior, perhaps where no road has yet been laid, an old man sits beside a fire and tells his grandchildren of a time before the eagles came, of a war that was not one war, but many, of a leader with flame-red hair and a Roman name who once believed Gaul could be one. The children listen, though the names are strange to them now. Alesia sleeps under moss. Cenabum is ash beneath Roman stone. The bridge across the Rhine is gone. Only the rivers remember its shape. Vercingetorix waits in chains beneath a city of marble. The legions wait for a signal, and Caesar, Gaius Julius Caesar, sharpens his mind on memory. He has written the war as he saw it, as he needed it. Soon he will write something else, with steps rather than ink. But for now he rests beneath the same stars that once guided the Helvetii, that once watched over nervy camps and the silent marches through Armorica. And the stars, indifferent and eternal, keep watch over a Gaul that no longer dreams the same dreams. The boots are still, the fires crackle low, the empire breathes out, and history, having spoken, now closes its eyes.